Irinu, Nina, Mr. Paistusi, and I just said I'm a human being from Grand Rapids. That's where I was born, in northern Manitoba. In 40 years' time, I'll be only 112 years old, so I hope to see you then. And by that time, all these young people here will be about my age, and they would have achieved great things for their community, for their people, and even for the country. I wanted to talk a little bit about my leadership, and because I wonder a lot of times, what was it all about, right? And for the young people here who were not born when I was National Chief, I wanted to sort of teach them a little bit about our political history, about our relationships with Canada, and about the movement to have our rights recognized in this country. So was my leadership ever about reconciliation? I must say, I don't know. The term is more recent, and the application of it now is to describe the current focus about the relationship between Indigenous nations and Canada. And the Prime Minister himself recently made a pronouncement on behalf of his government that all future laws and policies will be looked at to make sure that they comply with our Treaty on Aboriginal Rights, but also with the nation-to-nation relationship. However, my generation of leaders, we were looking for fairness in how our people were being treated. We were seeking justice for the wrongs that had been committed by the country. And we wanted a new relationship based on the idea of equality. We wanted also to make sure that we removed all the foreign settler constraints in our self-rule. And that means like getting rid of Indian agents, making sure that we ran the services for our people like education and housing, and that it wasn't done for us by some public servant. So in my time, the struggle was about power, removing power from public service and putting that power back into our communities. And we also knew that there was a big picture involved in our struggle, and that is we had to get our land back, we had to get our resources back, and that unless we were able to achieve that, there would be no way in which we could uplift our people and eliminate the poverty that's in our communities. We had to make sure that the decisions about development on our lands and resources were made by our nations, and that decisions were not made for our people by mining companies and forestry companies, who now, and at that time, had a greater right than we did about what happens on our traditional lands. So we were fighting back, not, like development. We were fighting back against development that didn't respect our people. And we wanted very much to restore our own understanding about what the ideal relationship should be with us and the earth, and how we as a people should protect the rivers and the waters, and how we should restore the kindness and the love that was there with our people before we were damaged by the colonial experience. So we never talked about reconciliation. We wanted the end of injustice. We were more seeking the restoration of our sovereignty, our self-determination as a people. And so it was really about the idea of Canada coming to an understanding that they are the ones to make the most changes. They're the ones to move towards us. That we have given up too much already in the past 150 years. And that some of the things that happened to us are questionable in law, but definitely questionable in morality. We were opposed to oppression and racism. That's what we talked about as young people, about the experience of racism in our lives and the oppression of our people. And we regarded racism and oppression as twins in the colonial measures that were adopted by Canada that formed the root basis of our present problems and situation. And you heard earlier today a presentation by a young lady, an amazing young woman, who's researching into the impact of education about the residential school period in our people's lives, and how that legacy of that system was based on what I call the roots of oppression and racism in our country. We never accepted, nor did we ever consent to the unlawful dispossession of our lands, our cultures, our languages. We never agreed to lose our spirituality. And we never surrendered our lands, our waters, and we never agreed that other people would rule our lives and our lands and our territory. See, we fought for these things. We fought for the restoration of these rights and freedoms. We did not fight for reconciliation. We knew from many political and legal struggles we had with Canada that our victory out of state-sanctioned poverty, for example, could only be secured successfully if Canada admitted to these past mistakes. But admission of error and mistakes would not be sufficient to correct the damage that was done. There had to be a genuine and honest measures taken to correct the mistakes and to arrive at a better relationship with our people. We demanded that Canada would guarantee our people's rights to land and resources, our freedom as a people, and that we wanted this country to stay away from the control that they have exercised for 150 years. Nowadays, we knew, for instance, that we spoke for everybody, that there was not a single indigenous community in this country that did not experience some kind of injustice based on oppression and racism. However, we also understood, and most definitely we understood this, that to accomplish what we set out to do in terms of the restoration of our own authority as a people, it would require a dialogue with Canada and would require negotiations with this country based on different principles other than oppression and racism. We knew that absolutely. We did not have any big discussions as young people about reconciliation with oppression and racism, but we did have discussions amongst ourselves on how we could combat oppression and racism. We were determined as young people to make sure that our generation would be the last generation to experience the negative impacts of being put down as a people and being diminished as a nation. To the contrary, we didn't talk about reconciliation at all. We talked about removing barriers, though, to our inherent rights, and we want to make sure our people were given the liberty to progress as a distinct people. We had grown up, you see, in my generation, we had grown up observing freedom movements. We had grown up seeing the decolonization of entire people. We didn't want to be left out as Indigenous people from securing our desired our rightful place on the earth. The last thing we wanted was for our people to be denied a fundamental freedom to be the masters of their destinies on their own territory and their ancestral lands. We demanded our freedoms and our right to be respected and not interfered with by municipalities, provinces, territories, or federal governments. And our demands and even our political thought required a discussion on how we decolonize this country. Perhaps, maybe that's what reconciliation should mean, decolonization. We also understood that given our population, our depopulation, I should say, over several centuries, that we would not be successful using democracy as a vehicle to get our country back. We did not have the vote powers for that. Unlike, say, India or South Africa. We understood most definitely that we would need to negotiate a better relationship with Canada, and that we have to use their supreme law to guarantee our freedoms as a people. We were interested in ensuring they recognized our collective rights as a people, not just our individual rights as human beings. We understood most definitely that this would not be accomplished unless Canadians and their governments were willing to change their socio and political system. We were not content with the economic status quo. Here and now, I make an offhanded comment because it's my way of making a point. Have you ever wondered why Indians, quotation marks, here in Canada did not obtain freedom to their lands when India successfully got rid of British rule? The reason is we as a people are not Indians. We are Gwich'in, we are Dene, we're Haida, we're Ninu, Cree, and so on. This is who we are. And that is what we fought for, the restoration of who we are. So reconciliation is a modern expression of hope for change, I think. What it means, I don't know. As far as I can determine, the language of reconciliation has been championed by the power centers, like the courts, the Canadian politicians, and other governments in Canada. But what is the intention behind reconciliation? What will it accomplish? Where will it take us for the next 150 years? Is reconciliation there to save face for Canada? I don't know. Or is it to end oppression and racism in this country? Will reconciliation lead to our freedom as a people? Will we get our land back? And will our depressing poverty finally end? Or is it just about getting along? About being good neighbors, just like it says in the Bible? I'm not opposed to good relationships, mind you. We most definitely need to have a civilized relationship with this country. However, if we want my generation of leaders, if we want what my generation leaders fought for, reconciliation may not accomplish that. Maybe only Canada will win. For me, good relations are a good thing, but it's not good enough. We have given Canada our peace and our friendship for over 150 years now. On the other hand, this country has acted in many ways in a hostile manner against our people. I suppose if Canada became more friendly, that would be a good thing too. However, peace and friendship will not end the oppression and racism. We need to see concrete actions and measures that result in true nation-to-nation relationships between us and Canada. We need to see an honest approach between us. we need to focus on truth. And we need to recognize that the reality of the present condition of our people has to be altered. However, I do see some hope myself, and I make one prediction. I see the resurgence of our people right now across the country. And I see a lot of young people coming and rising up and taking responsibility for development, their own personal growth, but for the development of our people. I know that our young people will achieve great things for themselves, but also for their independence and their particular nationhood. And by doing that, they will be contributing to the country. So the mission about reconciliation, the challenge for reconciliation, is not really ours. It is the country's challenge. We just maintain what we've been saying all along, that we're a distinct people with unique rights, and that we have a right, like as any nation in this world, to our own survival as a distinct people, and that we want to do this on our terms, on our time, and in our place. But I also wanted to share something about leadership with you. I wanted you to know something about who fought for you. And one such person is called Ethel Blondin, who I'm sure you're familiar with in the North. Ethel was a member of Parliament in my time when I was National Chief. And Canada was interested in accommodating Quebec after the patriation of the Constitution in 1982. Because the government of Quebec under René Lévesque did not sign on with the new constitution of the country, because they felt betrayed by how it was arrived at. So they never gave their consent to the Charter of Rights or to Section 35 or any of the provisions that were introduced by Pierre-Éliott Trudeau's government and the provinces of that day. So when the Liberal government lost and the Conservatives took power under Brian Mulroney, his ambition was to bring the family together, meaning the rest of Canada and Quebec, because that's how they define themselves. That's the two founding nations. So they proceeded to try to change the Constitution to satisfy Quebec, and they wanted to introduce the language of distinct society into the Supreme Law of Canada. Quebec as a distinct society. And I remember vividly, as if it was yesterday, an Inuit leader by the name of John McGaulick being critical about the idea of the two founding nations and disagreeing with the fact that we were excluded from any of the discussions during the Meech Lake Accord. We were fighting against the Accord. We were not fighting for it. And he said, if Quebec is a distinct society, what are we, chopped liver? Which I thought was a brilliant way of describing alienation and exclusion. But in the end, the governments didn't listen to our leadership at that time, and they proceeded to negotiate the Charlottetown Accord. On the day in which they agreed to that accord, Ethel Blondin and I were in the lobby next to the conference. Say this is the conference, we would have been just outside the door. We were permitted at least to have watched them on television as they were reaching an agreement on Meech Lake Accord. And afterwards, the media came to us. And we were not pleased with the result, because the result would have diminished our people again. And that once again, it was the two founding nations defining the future of this country in our absence, with our exclusion. And Ethel Blondin was not happy with that. So we developed a strategy. I said, Ethel, the media are going to talk to us. We're going to have a scrum. They call it a scrum. And after that, we'll do something else. So during the scrum, Ethel said, "What did these people just do? They should have a lobotomy." He says. So he was not happy with the fact that the Meat Lake Accord had been concluded in the absence of our people. So later that same day, of course, a few minutes after that, we devised a strategy to confront Premier Philman from Manitoba, where I come from. And I knew that the security were around, so the strategy was that I would move in this direction, because I knew if I moved that direction, security would follow me. We stayed hid. And then Ethel had the opportunity to confront Philman face to face, right, as Philman was entering into the elevator to take him to the Chateau Laurier, up in his room in Chateau Laurier. Because there's a tunnel between the convention center and the Chateau Laurier, right, and we had to go through that tunnel. And that's where Ethel shouted to Gary Philman, and this is national news, was on national television, saying, "How could you do that? How could you do that?" Right? And so this was one of the challenges that we had, because we were not respected as a people, obviously, by that government. And later that day, we developed a strategy to defeat Meat Lake, because in my province, it required unanimity. In other words, every member of the assembly had to agree to the amendments of the Constitution, and the rules of the Legislative Assembly required that. And out of that became our hero, Elijah Harper, who said no to the Meat Lake Accord, holding an eagle feather like this. And the rest is history, as they say, because the Meat Lake Accord never passed and never became law in this country. But that led to another process later on when I became the national chief. Because in 1982, Trudeau had promised our people that we would be at the constitutional table with the premiers and himself to look at ways and means of entrenching our rights in the Constitution of Canada. So Section 35 was introduced as part of the introduction of the new law, the new Constitution, and it says something like this: that the Treaty on Aboriginal Rights of Indigenous people are hereby recognized and affirmed. But there was also a second provision that said that the Prime Minister will convene constitutional conferences and invite leaders of the Aboriginal people to participate. So we had a series of constitutional discussions from 1982 to 1992. Some of you were just born then in 1992 when these discussions were concluded. All the efforts to have our rights given explicit recognition failed. We couldn't get the provinces to agree, or the federal government to agree, that our titles should be explicitly guaranteed in the Constitution. And it was not until later on that there was a provision there that recognized that any future negotiations respecting land would be regarded as treaty rights. But initially the opposition was there. And then when we finished negotiating the Charlottetown Accord, there was at that point some movement within Canada. Three things in particular. One was that all the existing treaties would be interpreted in a liberal manner, and that these treaties would be implemented in a political forum, not in the courts, and that the provinces would be involved to the extent of their jurisdiction and only by invitation of the people who signed treaties with the British Crown. So, but the commitment was there, a constitutional commitment to implement the rights under treaty as understood by our people. And the second provision that was agreed to was the recognition that our people had the inherent right to govern themselves, and there was no division, no definition of it. It was just a general description of what it meant. Like it meant that our people could govern their people, their lands and their waters, their cultures and their languages, and they would have their own territory and so on. And they would have the power to make laws, and they would have the power to create assemblies, legislative assemblies, that wouldn't be limited to band councils. They could form, say, a Gwich'in assembly, a lawmaking body for the Gwich'in people. So the recognition under the Constitution for our inherent right was this idea that we would constitute within Canada a third order government, not third level, not underneath anybody, but a third order. So you have the federal powers, the provincial powers, and our powers as Indigenous people. And the third thing that Charlottetown spoke about was this whole idea of generating equality in terms of the distribution of wealth in Canada, so that our governments would have the capacity to provide this public services to our people. So we wouldn't have to be dealing with negotiations with public servants on contribution agreements, that we would be dealing with a fiscal system where we would have transfers from federal and provincial governments for public services for our people, and that we would have the authority under our inherent right of government to decide on those expenditures. So Charlottetown was a progressive move. It would have been, in many ways, very different today if Charlottetown would have passed the referendum. But the requirement was that before it became law, the provinces insisted on a referendum on the Charlottetown Accord. And the referendum allowed our people to vote too. And it was defeated. The Charlottetown Accord was defeated, not just by the Canadian people, our own people didn't vote for it. That we didn't even have a majority of our own people supporting their own inherent right to govern themselves, or the right to have their treaties implemented in accordance to our way of seeing things. So, to me though, it wasn't lost forever. That Charlottetown is still the high water mark for our people. That's where we start now. We never go below that. So in the future, any constitutional talks, and there has to be constitutional talks, because in the absence of that, the promise for a nation of nations is not going to be fulfilled. And the reason why I'm saying that is because of this concept of the rule of law. Canadians, they respect this idea of the rule of law. So the reasoning is that if their own supreme law says that we have our own self-government, that we have a fiscal relationship with Canada, and that the treaties have to be implemented in a way Aboriginal people understood them. The reasoning was that then maybe Canadians would support that they wouldn't oppose it just because they don't agree with it. Because if they really support the rule of law, then they would recognize that this is the right thing to do. So I wanted also to talk a little more about personal stuff. As a young man growing up in Grand Rapids, I grew up at the time when there was no knowledge of racism or oppression. I grew up in a community that was self-determining in many ways. But I didn't understand, of course, that we lived under a country called Canada. I just saw my people, the Inuit, the Cree people, and we made up the majority in our community. Everything was in our language. And our people were hunters, they were trappers, and they were fishermen. And I never understood poverty. I never believed I was poor, because we always had food, and clothing was made from moose hide, and we had jackets made of that and so on. And so we felt we had self-determination, I guess, looking back now. But we weren't suffering either, we weren't hurting. And I don't recall issues of what they call juvenile delinquency. I don't remember seeing family violence. And I don't remember seeing the negativity that exists in our communities right now towards our own leaders and so on. So I grew up with that atmosphere of knowing who we are as a people. Right? So even our greetings required us to understand our culture. So when you'd see someone coming to you and you say, if they're strangers and they're not from your community, you would say, "E nakina," who are you? And then after the answer who they were, you would say, "Dandeo shigina," like, where are you from? And when they answer that, you would say, "Dande tutien," where you're going. So these questions are about identity. So for the Gwich'in people, in your own language, you have to say, who am I, where do I come from, and where am I going? Right? Because these are questions that will demand your understanding of identity and your culture, your language, and your place on the earth. Right? Now leadership, you can't learn leadership in a book. So don't buy books on leadership. You'll be wasting your money. Right? Leadership is also something that can be learned. It's not something that someone is born with, but you can learn to be a leader. And leadership is not just about politics. Leadership is about everything in life. So you can be a leader in education, or you can be a leader in community relations. Right? Or you can be a leader in health and so on. So leadership to me is not about a top-down relationship between the politicians and the people. So leadership is really about egalitarianism, which is the way our people were. They were egalitarians. They weren't socialists, they weren't liberals, they weren't conservative, but they were egalitarian people. And that's what we were prior to colonization. And then we learned to become more like the Canadian population. Like this idea of leadership being someone who becomes on top and makes decisions for the people without consulting them. That was never our understanding of leadership. And the other thing I wanted to share with you is this. As a young man, I recognized that we had to champion our people and we'd have to fight for our rights. I knew that right off the bat as soon as we experienced oppression from Manitoba Hydro when they built a dam in our community and flooded most of our lands. My mother didn't have running water until 2 years before she died. 3 years before she died, she died 2 years ago. But all the white people that worked for Manitoba Hydro had running water when Hydro came to Grand Rapids. And we didn't even have electricity for a long time, right? Because what happened, we were completely dismissed as a people. We weren't regarded as worthy of consultation. And there was not even an agreement between us and Manitoba Hydro. There was no what they call impact benefit agreements now, right? We didn't have that. So I know what bad development means and what the impact of that is and the legacy of that kind of development in our communities. So that's what, in many ways, taught me out about fighting for justice for our people. And but how do you lead though? If you can't learn how to lead from a book, how do you lead then? And if all the leadership around you is being conducted by other people other than your own people, how do you learn from your own people to be a leader? If all the leaders are non-Indigenous. Well, I learned a long time ago, I think, that leadership is learned by experience. Like observations like I just made is about being a leader. You're understanding your environment, and you're knowing what you need to change, and then making a determination to change it. But the other thing about leadership is this: isipawataman, what you're dreaming. Whatever you're dreaming, you listen to your dream. Because after Charlottetown, for example, I went to a place called Subinakity in Nova Scotia. Not after Charlottetown, but after Meech Lake Accord, after we defeated the Meech Lake Accord, I was invited to Subinakity to speak to the community about treating Aboriginal rights. And while I was there, staying at the chief's house, and they made room for me in one of his children's bedroom. That night I had a dream, and at that time I wasn't a national chief. I wasn't an elected leader. I was a lawyer though, working for the chiefs. But in that dream, it was about our relationships with this country and what we should do in terms of our progress, our development, our re-emergence as nations. In that dream, what I saw was I was sitting in a bench, and that bench was made of marble. The floor was marble, the ceiling was made of marble, and the hallway was made of marble. And behind me were these pillars made of marble, and ahead of me were these pillars made of marble. On the left side of me were these steps made of marble, and then on there was some kind of a desk, or I'm not sure what it was, but it was made of marble, and it was very, very pristine and beautiful. And I'm sitting beside a young Indigenous woman, and she doesn't say anything. She's just sitting there, and I'm observing what's happening. And then out of the direction where I'm facing emerges a woman and comes towards me. And that woman is my mother. And she walks beside me, and then she taps me on the shoulder, and she said, meaning back where I'm looking in my back, that's where we came from. And that's where we have to go. Past the pillars, not deep into the society, but beyond what the image that I saw, which was Western civilization, the idea of Western civilization. So that dream told me that what we have to do is find a way to rest for a bit. And that's what Charlottetown Accord represented to me, a place to rest for a bit. But our mission was not to go deeper into their culture, not to assimilate into Canadian society fully, not to get lost in their political legal system, but to go right past their society and re-emerge as a stronger people. And that the Charlottetown Accord was just a stopping place until we could, in 50 years' time from now, like you say, 40 years now, you will re-emerge stronger than you are now, but you can never be the same as the people, our ancestors. So that you have to appreciate that. You have to take something from the society too, in order to develop and grow, right? So your dreams are important, and the dreams of others are important. You have to listen to what the elders say, especially in ceremony. And I'll end with this story about another thing that informed my leadership when I was national chief. I was elected in 1991, and within 2 months of being elected, I was called to go to Saskatchewan to attend a sweat lodge ceremony, and they wanted me to bring my headdress that I had received from Alberta, from some of the Alberta communities, and they wanted to bless my headdress, and they told me to bring my wife, and that we would go into the sweat. We would have 6 rounds. Normally it's 4, but 6 rounds. And there would be 36 rocks. And 1 rock for one rock for every eagle feather in my headdress. Right? And that we went into the sweat. It was very hot. And after it was done, it was conducted by these 4 elders. There were 4 Cree elders, my people were the ones. But the sweat lodge was in the Wahpeton Reserve, which is a Dakota Reserve, another tribe. And they presented to me with 5 what they call flags. Like, these are used for ceremony. They gave me a white one, a yellow one, a green one, a blue one, and a red one. And I asked them when they presented these flags to me what I'm supposed to do with them. And the elder that spoke on behalf of the others who were there said, well, you will know what to do with them when the time comes. So that means that you have to be open to receiving some kind of intuitive messages from a source other than what we're used to, like a physical source. And I was told to take the white flag along with, after the feast, to take some food and go and find the appropriate tree, a cottonwood tree on that reserve of the Dakota people, and place the food at the foot of the tree to feed the ancestors, and then to place the flag as high as I can on the tree, because the flag is supposed to remind me, the white flag is supposed to remind me that whatever I do as a leader, I'm supposed to put the Creator first, and that the white flag would represent that kind of guidance to me. So a few months, maybe a few years go by, and then I'm asked to go to the Haida people, and I'm called by the hereditary chiefs to come and visit them. So we talked for a while, and we came to this understanding that one of the flags must stay with them. And so we found one of the tallest trees in front of the Eagle clan, longhouse. And with my bare hands, I dug a hole to find the roots of the tree. And I placed these 4 medicines that were given to me, like tobacco, sweetgrass, sage, and cedar. And we prayed together for unity, for the unity of our people, all our people. And then when that was done, I climbed as far as I could, as high as I could in that tree, and I tied that green flag on that tree to represent how important unity is for our people. And as my term is over, and then I get reelected, and then I end up being an old crow, and I get invited to go to the calving grounds of the people there down the river, or maybe upstream, I forget. But anyway, the calving grounds of the caribou. And the women who were there with me, the elders who were there with me, we shared a pipe ceremony together. And then afterwards, a couple of the younger women from that community, about the age of the presenter that was here just before me, before I spoke, about that age. And they both climbed the tree. Of course, we dug and put medicines on the roots, and they both climbed the tree. So the yellow flag is an old crow somewhere in the calving grounds of your people, the Gwich'in people. And that's supposed to represent the woman in society, the woman's place in our society, their role in our progress as a people. And years later, I went to Con River, which is in Newfoundland. And there again, we did a pipe ceremony. And after the ceremony was done, we had these young men and the young men and young boys. Like it was supposed to represent the children and the youth. So the blue flag is in Conn River, and that was the whole idea, that we have to respect our children and our youth, and they are part of our nation. And I kept thinking, well, someday I'll get an understanding, I'll probably get a dream or maybe some intuitive idea of what to do with the red flag. But it never came. So I still have the red flag. And I don't know what that means. I'm hoping that I can last until 112 years old, 112 years, right? And I'm going to hang on to it as long as I can, because I figure the Creator wants me around until I do something about it, about the red flag. And then the interesting thing about ceremony is that our people have been dissuaded by Christianity not to believe in ceremony. But we can't be limited by the thinking of other people. Our hearts have to be open to any kind of belief that's going to help us. And it doesn't have to be Christianity, it could be Buddhism, or it could be the Muslim faith, it could be any faith. But we have our own as well. And so I believe what the elders told me when they said to me, Ovide, you were chosen, but you have to understand that you were not chosen to change anything. You were chosen to teach them who we are. And I didn't want to hear that, because I wanted to change everything. I wanted to bring injustice to an end and all that. I wanted to achieve great things like that, for justice for our people. And then these elders tell me that the spirits are telling them that all I'm going to do is be a teacher, to teach Canadians who we are. And then they also said that I will be given a choice as to how I will lead, and that choice was entirely up to me. But that the people would know that I would come to visit them. And when I was National Chief, I went to over 450 reserves to make sure that I went to visit the people. Because how can I lead the people if I don't know where they are? Right? So I listened to what they had to say, and this was after Oka. And for the young people here, Oka was a time when the army, the Canadian Army, was used against the Mohawks. And all the Mohawks were trying to do was prevent a golf course from being built on their traditional grounds and their grave sites. And that became a major conflict in this country that united all the nations across the country. And but also woke up the racism in the hearts and minds of many Canadians. And at one point, when the elders were trying to escape one of their communities to find safer ground, they were stoned by the people in Quebec as they were passing by in their cars. They were stoned by some members of the population who were hostile against our people. He didn't represent everybody in the province, but you could see the ugly face of racism at that time. So the choice I was given was related to all that. Because what the elder said to me was this: you have been given a choice on how to lead. So you can be as loud as the thunder, or as gentle as the rain it brings. So that means that I could have, if I wanted to, maybe become an angry leader, an aggressive leader, a violent leader, if I wanted to, with the power or the sound of the thunder. That's what they were telling me. You could be that, or you could be a peaceful leader, a non-violent leader. And I chose, of course, the path of our people, which is non-violence, which has always been our path as a people. This is the only country where the indigenous population that's been colonized and oppressed have not rose up with arms against the colonizer. The only incident was the Real Rebellion But that was an act of self-defense on the part of the Métis people too. It wasn't an aggressive act by Rial. And that's what I argued in defense of what the Mohawks were doing to protect our people when they put a block to the Mercier Bridge. That by blocking the bridge it was better than shooting people, and that they had a right of self-determination and the right of self-defense in international law. So young people, I don't normally share these stories. In fact, I only share it with my family. But those two dreams, one dream, and my experience in the sweat lodge, what I was told by the elders. I'm sharing that with you because I trust you. And I want you to be open to that, to be open to hear messages from our own spirituality, to guide you, to help you become strong leaders. Because there is a wound, you see. Our people are carrying a wound. But people think that the wound is because of sexual abuse, because of physical abuse. That these are wounds too, because of mental abuse. The wound is deeper than that. It is a loss of culture, it's a loss of society, the loss of our beliefs as a people. That's the deepest wound. And that means like family, the loss of family. Like when the young kids were removed from their families, there was no continuity, no connection to the values that the Gwich'in people had or the Cree people had about family life. So that is a deeper wound. But there is a third wound. And it's a third wound that people don't talk about. And what do you think that is? That third wound. You see, from 1885 to 1926, in the Indian Act, there was a provision that was passed by Parliament, by white people, to help the churches. A law that says that the Indian people cannot practice their spirituality, like the potlatch or the Sundance. Now, the Sundance didn't belong to all nations, but the elements of the Sundance included the drum, the rattle, the sweetgrass, the smudging, and the sacrificing, and the feasting for our ancestors. All these were elements. Also for the potlatch in British Columbia. And the churches, the Catholic Church and the Anglican churches, they took advantage of that, Protestant churches. And they prohibited our people from 1926 to even to the present, in some cases, particularly with the evangelical movements, from using their rattles or their drums, from restoring these traditional ways of spirituality. That is the deepest wound. You see, that is the third wound, the loss of spirituality. And the unfortunate thing is this, because of the impact of the residential schools, there is also now people leaving in droves from Christianity, from the churches. So there is a gap being left behind. There's a hole being left. There is no spiritual connection. And because of that, our people are suffering. So you have to find a spiritual source. It doesn't matter where it is, whether it's in Christianity or any other faith, but you got to find one as young people. But just to use it. To use it, for your own strength. But also because, as one elder told me one time, and he was like a philosopher elder, and he said to me, Ovide, where do you think knowledge comes from? And I said, I'm a pretty smart guy to begin with. And I said, well, I don't think it comes from books, because I'm sure he didn't want me to say that. And then he finally said to me, Ovide, there's nothing new in this world. Everything that is has already been. And everything that's been will always be. It'll always be there. And I had said to him, prior to him telling me that, Peter, I have been given 7 drums now since being National Chief. And he said, well, use them. And I said, Peter, I grew up as a Catholic. I didn't grow up a traditional way. I don't know any of these songs. How can I possibly sing these songs? I don't know these songs. They were not part of my community by the time I was born. That's how complete Christianity was by 1940, 46. And he said, all you need, Ovide, he said, everyone has a spirit. We're all spiritual people. We have a spirit. Your spirit is connected to the Gwich'in, to the Great Spirit. And all knowledge comes from there. All you need to do is connect your spirit to the Great Spirit. And you will know the songs. And what an understanding of where knowledge comes from. But also, it requires faith and belief. And we have not lost our knowledge, you see. It's there waiting for us to tap into it. And if you look at what's happened to our society and the revival of our traditional ways across the country, a lot of that has been brought back by our young people. Like in my community, my mother's generation are not involved in traditional ways, but my generation is, and the generation after me is. So even my community that never saw a Sundance, there's 2 Sundances now, that never saw a sweat lodge before, in my time, as sweat lodge ceremonies. And they do fast, they put young people in the land to do fast so they know who they are. They find their core being so they have an idea of what they want to accomplish in life. And we also have the powwow, we have the dance, celebration of our ancestral ways of dance. So all that I want to share with you because I want our young people to keep an open mind about spirituality. Not to have your mind shut down for you by what happened in 1926 by white politicians in Parliament. Because what was happening with the Christian churches in that time of our history was the Indian people were not converting. They were having trouble converting the Indian people. So they had to find a way of doing it. And the way in which they did it was to pass a law against our spirituality and also to make a law for the residential schools. And you know the rest of the history. Maaga, I want to end with this message. Like I have to go to the airport, so I got to run. And I hope you have dreams, young people. I hope you have dreams. And I hope your dreams are always positive. Always about hope and progress. And that will happen if you want those kinds of dreams. To be open to that. And you know what? One of the things that I learned a long time ago is this. We may have experienced things that no human being should experience, like sexual abuse, for example. And we may have been, our humanity might have been challenged by racism, for example. But these don't define who we are. That's not who we are. The hurt that comes from that is not who we are. We do not have to stay with that feeling. We can rise above it. It's like what, I forget your first name.
Adrian.
Yeah? Adrian said about himself. He's an example of what I'm talking about. That he may have had all these experiences, but that never defined him. But in order to find his way, he had to go to our elders. And he had to find his own spiritual source. So it's not enough to have an education, to have a law degree, not enough to be a psychiatrist or a doctor. All these are great things to achieve. But for me, the greatest thing we can do for our people, and your generation has to work on this, is that third wound has to be healed. The wound about the missing spirituality. We have to fill that. We have to fill that wound. So thank you very much. Thanks for listening.